story, the house on Ocean Avenue. When I was 9, we moved into a house where 6 people had been murdered in their sleep. No one told me about the murders, not until years later. By then, I already knew. Not because I read about it, not because someone warned me, but because the house told me. We moved into the house at the end of Ocean Avenue in the spring of 1994. I was 9. It was my first time seeing the ocean, at least in a way that mattered. Where we came from in Ohio, waterfront property meant algae-covered retention ponds and mosquito-breeding swamps behind chain-link fences. But here in Amityville, the canal ran wide and clean along the back edge of our new lawn, reflecting the sun like a sheet of glass. There were boats docked at wooden slips behind nearly every house on our block, including ours. The house, 112 Ocean Avenue, sat slightly lower than the street. You wouldn't notice it unless you were looking, but once you did, it never quite left your mind. From the front it looked modest, almost shy. White painted wood, symmetrical windows, and a sharply gabled roof, but around the back it stretched. 3 floors, a boathouse, and a yard large enough for soccer games we never played. It was too big. Bigger than we needed, bigger than I ever imagined we'd live in. I remember my dad standing in the driveway during our first afternoon there, arms crossed, nodding to himself. "Got a hell of a deal, Wissen," he said. Someone really wanted to move. My mom was already inside, wiping dust off the kitchen counters like she was afraid of waking something up. "Did they say why the owners left?" I heard her ask once, after the agent had gone. Dad shrugged. "Divorce. Maybe debt. Who cares? Place is ours now." The house came mostly furnished. That part was strange. There was still a couch in the den, covered in plastic. The dining room had a long cherry wood table that looked like it hadn't been touched in years. And my room, tucked all the way at the top, in the attic gable, already had a twin bed in it. The headboard was carved with swirls I couldn't trace to any style I knew. The mattress creaked like it had a memory. "This room's got the best view," my mom said, opening the shutters. "Look, you can see the whole canal." What I saw was the neighbor's dock and a stretch of water that ran behind 4 other homes before curving into marsh. And I remember thinking how still it was, like the canal had forgotten how to move. That first night I woke up with a nosebleed. I'd never had one before. My pillow was damp, my face sticky and hot. I went to the bathroom in the hallway and tried not to cry while I cleaned myself up. When I came back, the door to my room was closed. I hadn't closed it. I was sure of that. The second night I heard footsteps in the hallway. My parents' bedroom was on the 2nd floor, same as mine, but I could tell by the sound that the steps didn't match either of them. These were lighter, quicker, childlike. When I opened the door, the hallway was empty, but the attic trapdoor, leading to the crawl space above, was open just a crack. By the end of the first week, Mom had stopped singing in the kitchen. She always sang while cooking. Little snippets of old Carpenters or Fleetwood Mac tunes, hummed out of tune with the oven fan droning beneath it. But now, the house seemed to absorb her voice before it could echo. Dad kept busy in the garage, sanding something that didn't need sanding. I'd see him crouched by the workbench with the overhead bulb casting his shadow long across the floor. He smoked more. We started eating dinner in silence. Forks on porcelain. The occasional clink of glass. Always followed by the soft groan of a pipe or floorboard overhead. like the house was swallowing its breath. I asked Mom one evening if we could go back home, to Ohio. She looked at me for a long time before answering. "This is our home now," she said. I remember the first time I found the hatch. It was behind the wardrobe in my room. An old wooden thing with peeling varnish and a door that didn't close all the way. I was playing hide and seek with myself, which is what you do when you don't have siblings or neighbors who like you. I pulled the wardrobe away from the wall and found the outline of a panel in the sloped part of the attic ceiling, painted shut but not very well. I pried it open with a ruler. Inside was darkness, and the smell of dust soaked in time. I crawled in with a flashlight. The crawl space ran maybe 5 feet back, low enough that I had to keep my head down. There were scratch marks on the beams, tiny ones, dozens of them, in sets of 3. And at the far end, pressed into the corner, was a box. It was wooden, unmarked. I opened it, expecting tools or mouse nests. What I found was a headless doll and 6 broken crayons and a note. The paper was yellowed and soft. Just one sentence, scrawled in red wax. He said we wouldn't hear it if we were asleep. I didn't tell anyone. I folded the paper back into the box and left everything as it was. I didn't want to know who wrote it. I didn't want to know who he was. That night, I lay awake, the flashlight on my chest, staring at the trapdoor. It stayed shut. But just before I fell asleep, I heard a creak. Software right behind the wall. 3 times, like someone dragging their nails across the beam. The first dream came the night after I found the box in the crawl space. I didn't eat anything weird that day, didn't read or watch anything frightening. It was just a regular Tuesday. School, homework, ham sandwiches for dinner, bed by 9:30. Nothing strange, nothing heavy. But I woke up screaming. In the dream, I was in my bed, exactly where I was. But there were 6 figures at the foot of it. They didn't move. They didn't speak. Not at first. They stood perfectly still, blacker than the dark behind them, like the room itself refused to let light touch them. I couldn't see their faces, but I knew, somehow horribly, that every single one of them was staring directly at me. And then the whispering began. At first, I thought it was wind. The windows were shut, but the whisper slipped through the cracks. A dry, broken language that scratched at the edges of my hearing, as if the words weren't made for human ears. The voices layered over one another like leaves in a gutter. One low, one high, one gasping, one clicking like teeth, and then my name. My name clearly, whimpered out of 6 mouths all at once. When I opened my eyes for real, the room was empty, but the back of my neck was soaked through, and the collar of my pajama shirt clung to my skin like someone had been holding it. I didn't tell my parents, not yet. The next night, Mom got up 4 times. I heard her moving around the hallway between 1 and 3 a.m., barefoot, careful. Her steps were soft, but I knew her rhythm. Quick, precise, always stopping at the window near the landing, the one that overlooked the backyard and the boathouse. The 3rd time, I crept to my door and peeked out. She was just standing there, arms crossed, tight against her chest, staring out at nothing, or maybe something. She didn't blink. When I asked her about it the next morning, she said must have been the wind. But her eyes were red-rimmed, and her voice didn't match the words. By the end of that week, things started changing in the house. Little things, but they added up fast. I'd close my window before bed, double-check the latch, but every morning, it was open again. Just a crack, enough to let in the cold, enough to raise goosebumps. Once or twice, I'd swear I heard the click myself, in the middle of the night. That distinct tick-thunk of the latch sliding loose, followed by the groan of the frame expanding, like wood remembering something it wasn't supposed to. The hallway light, an old brass fixture with a warm yellow glow, started flickering. At first I thought it was faulty wiring, but it never happened during the day. Only between 2 and 4 in the morning. Always when no one was moving. The light would switch on by itself and stay that way for a few minutes before snapping off. I tested the switch. It didn't work unless you physically flipped it. One night, I tried staying up to catch it. I sat by my door, with the hallway just barely in view, the edge of the light barely brushing across the carpet. It was 3:12 when it turned on. There was no sound, no creak of floorboard, no shadow on the wall, just light, pale, soft, quiet, like it was trying not to wake anyone. Then came the footsteps. I heard them on the landing at first, light ones, barefoot, not my parents. Dad's footfalls were heavy, impatient, and Mom's were brisk, with a kind of nervous energy. These were smaller, slower, like a child. I thought of my sister, but she was only 3 years old, and she never got up at night. She slept like the dead, Mom always said. Even thunderstorms didn't wake her. I got curious. One night, when I heard the steps again, I crept into the hallway. It was empty, but the air smelled wrong. Not bad exactly, just old, like wet cloth left too long in a closet. When I went back to bed, my door creaked closed behind me on its own. That weekend, Mom brought up sleep problems at the dinner table. Her voice was casual, light, like she was talking about the weather, but she kept her eyes on her plate. "I've been waking up a lot," she said, stabbing at green beans. "Dreams, maybe." Dad shrugged. "Stress." "What stress?" "You're the one who said you wanted a new place. Waterfront, big kitchen." She didn't respond. Just kept eating. Her knife scraped the plate louder than necessary. Sunday night, I woke up to the sound of something skittering under the bed. I lay still for a full minute, listening, trying to tell myself it was the heating pipes. But the sound wasn't metallic. It wasn't the groan of wood or the clink of expanding joints. It was soft, fast, like fingertips. I slid out of bed slowly and crouched down. Nothing, just dust and my box of Lego sets. But when I stood up, my flashlight on the nightstand was already turned on. The next day, Mom found a trail of muddy footprints in the upstairs hallway. They were small, too small for me, and too clear to be an accident. Dad said I was pranking, that I must have tracked something in and made a mess. But Mom didn't look at me when he said it. She stared at the footprints for a long time. And then she went downstairs without a word. The attic room was always colder than the rest of the house. It didn't matter what season it was or how high we turned the thermostat. The moment I stepped into that room, something in the air shifted. The warmth from the staircase thinned out, like it had been filtered through something ancient and unwelcoming. The floorboards groaned even when no one stepped on them. The corners collected more dust than they should have, and it never seemed to blow away. But I didn't complain. It was the biggest bedroom I'd ever had, and the window, the round one, was beautiful. It sat high up in the slanted wall like an unblinking eye. A perfect circle of thick old glass that distorted the canal view just slightly, as though it were underwater. From my bed, I could see the reflection of the moon curling on its surface every night. Some mornings, I woke up to find small handprints on it. On the inside, The wardrobe was massive, too tall for me to reach the top, too heavy to move on my own. It sat against the far wall beneath the slant of the roof, its hinges creaking like a complaint whenever I opened it. One afternoon, chasing a wind-blown comic book, I accidentally pushed too hard against the back wall of the wardrobe, and it moved. Just a little, an inch or two. But enough. There was a space behind it. A narrow vertical crack between plaster and paneling, just wide enough to slide a hand through. I reached in and felt air. Cool, dry, still, then wood, then nothing. I waited until evening, when Dad was downstairs, then went back with a flashlight and a butter knife. I wedged it into the side and pried. Something gave way with a muffled pop. The back panel of the wardrobe shifted outward and revealed a hidden opening. Just a crawl-sized arch in the wall. I ducked through. The space beyond was no bigger than a walk-in closet, though it felt larger because of the way sound behaved inside it. My breath echoed back to me, soft but wrong, like someone else was copying it just a second too late. The walls were unfinished slats, old and gray with time. There was insulation in places, yellowed and shriveled like dead flowers. Along one beam, someone had scratched a series of lines, thousands of them, all in groups of 6. And in the back corner sat a child's rocking horse, one eye missing, the other gouged black. Next to it was a ragged bundle of cloth. I leaned in closer. It was a doll, or what was left of one. The head had been severed cleanly, its arms curled in stiff defensive positions. The fabric around its neck was crusted with what looked like rust, or something worse. There were teeth marks on the shoulders. I backed out of the crawl space without touching anything. The flashlight flickered twice before going out completely. The next day, something new appeared in my room. A stain. It started as a faint brown spot on the ceiling just above my bed. I thought maybe it was an old watermark, something from a long-forgotten leak. I told Mom. She looked up at it with that same distant gaze. She gave the hallway footprints. She nodded once, slowly. Then she said, "Don't sleep with your mouth open." I didn't ask what she meant. Each day the stain grew. Thin trails spread from the center, like roots or veins, slowly reaching outward. I stood on my desk and touched it once, expecting moisture, some sign of seepage. But it was bone dry, even dusty, and yet every night it looked darker, like something behind the ceiling was getting closer to the surface. That same week, I began waking up at exactly 3:15 a.m. Not 3:13, not 3:17, always 3:15. The first time, I thought it was coincidence, the second maybe internal rhythm. But by the 5th night, I stopped using an alarm clock. I didn't need it. My body just knew. And every time I woke, the house was dead silent. No wind, no creaking pipes, no distant traffic. Only my own breath and something else. On the 7th night, I opened my eyes to find the rocking horse from the crawl space sitting at the foot of my bed. No noise had woken me, no sound of dragging or placing. Just there, still watching. I stared at it for what felt like hours. When I finally blinked and looked again, it was gone. I checked the crawl space the next morning. It was back in its corner, but someone had turned it to face the entrance. The smell in my room began to change. Faint at first, metallic, then sweeter, like rotting leaves. Mom lit candles, cinnamon, lavender, but the scent always returned, heavy, thick, clinging to my pillow and close like memory. One night I woke up gagging. Something had been placed on my chest. It was small, cold. I grabbed it in the dark and flung it across the room before realizing what it was. The doll's head. I found it the next morning under my desk. Its eyes were painted shut. Its mouth was stitched open. I stopped going into the crawl space. But the sounds didn't stop. They got louder. Some nights I heard scratching. Not frantic, just steady, rhythmic, like something carving a pattern in the wood. Once I pressed my ear against the wall and held my breath. There was breathing, not mine, slower, wet. And then a voice, just one word, barely audible. Again, I didn't sleep that night. By the 10th night of 3:15 awakenings, I started noticing something else. Reflections. The round attic window gave a distorted view during the day, but at night, it reflected just enough of the room to glimpse shapes. Movement. Silhouettes that didn't match mine. Once, while staring into the glass, I saw a second me, smaller, thinner, standing directly behind my shoulder. When I turned, the room was empty, but the stain on the ceiling had spread halfway across the plaster. It now formed 6 long fingers reaching down, and they were pointing directly at my bed. It happened slowly, the way wood rots from the inside, quietly, invisibly, until it's too late to repair. At first, it was just little things. Mom stopped humming. She used to hum when folding laundry, or when scrubbing the sink, or while staring out at the canal. Old love songs mostly. Carpenter's, Fleetwood Mac. Sometimes something classical she didn't know the name of. But one afternoon, while she was rinsing vegetables by the window, I realized I couldn't hear anything. No music, no humming. Just the faucet and the wind tapping the glass. I asked her, "What are you thinking about?" She jumped. "I wasn't," she said too quickly, drying her hands with a rag. "Just tired." But that night, I heard her whispering to herself in the hallway. Not loud, not angry, just steady, like reciting something, or answering someone. I couldn't make out the words, only the rhythm, like a call and response with someone I couldn't hear. Dad changed too. He was always sharp, in control, like a man who chewed deadlines for breakfast. But now, he came home later, his breath sour and voice frayed at the edges. He started forgetting things, names, dates, sometimes even where we kept the glasses. One night, after spilling bourbon on the kitchen tiles, he slammed the cabinet shut so hard a plate cracked in the sink. He didn't apologize, just stared at the broken pieces for a long time. Later that week, he left a note on the fridge. "Working late. Don't wait up." But when I checked the driveway at midnight, the car was there, still warm. My sister, Anna, began drawing. She was only 3, but her motor skills were ahead of her age. At first, the pictures were what you'd expect: cats, stick people, lopsided flowers. But then the drawings started changing. They always showed the same room, our kitchen. And in that kitchen, always the same man. He stood facing the sink, tall, dark, and featureless. No eyes, no mouth, no face at all, just blank skin where features should have been. His arms hung at his sides. He never moved, never turned around. The fridge was always colored red. Mom taped the first few drawings to the fridge like it was normal. By the 8th or 9th one, she started hiding them in drawers. But Anna kept drawing, quietly, determined, like she was copying something she saw every day. One afternoon, I asked Mom if she noticed anything weird. She was folding laundry on the couch, my socks, my jeans, Dad's shirts. "Like what?" she asked without looking up. "I don't know, like the windows, or the lights turning on at night." She paused with a towel in her hands, then folded it slowly and set it aside. "This house doesn't like too many questions," she said. Her tone was casual, but her eyes didn't match. She stared at the hallway like she was listening for something. "Let it be," she whispered. That evening, Anna cried during dinner. She said the man in the kitchen was mad at her. When Dad asked why, she only repeated the word eyes over and over, her face blotchy and trembling. Mom scooped her up without another word and took her upstairs. Dad poured another drink. No one finished the spaghetti. Later that night, I crept down to the kitchen by myself. The house was quiet but not empty. I could feel it. The smell was strange, like damp soil mixed with something metallic. The kitchen tiles were clean, no stains, no footprints. But the fridge hummed louder than usual, and the faucet dripped once, twice, then stopped. I turned to leave, but just as I reached the doorway, I glanced back. In the reflection of the oven door, I saw a shape. Tall, still, standing where Anna said he always stood. But when I turned around, there was no one there. The next morning, Mom threw away every drawing Anna had made. She told her to stop, said it was scaring the house. Anna cried and wouldn't come out of her room for hours. When I asked Mom what she meant, she looked at me too long, like she was checking how much I'd already guessed. Then she smiled, slow and tired. "You'll understand when you're older," she said. I never asked again. But that night, the man in Anna's drawing moved. The drawing was still on the fridge, one of the few Mom hadn't noticed yet. I passed it on my way to get a glass of water and froze. The kitchen was still there. Same layout, same red fridge. But this time, the faceless man wasn't standing still. His arm was raised, bent at the elbow, reaching for something beneath the sink. I looked at the real kitchen, empty, but the faucet turned on by itself, just for a second. After that, we all changed. Dinner was quiet, too quiet. No one looked at each other anymore. Dad started locking the garage at night. He said it was for safety, but the locks weren't to keep people out. They were to keep something in. Mom stopped sleeping in the master bedroom. She moved into Anna's room and wouldn't let her out of sight. And me? I started locking my door. It didn't help. At 3:15 a.m., I still woke up, still saw the handprints on the attic window, still heard the steps behind the wall. But now, I wasn't alone in that. Because one night, as I stared at the ceiling stain growing above my bed, I heard something from the hallway. A voice, low, uneven. "Let me in." It sounded like Dad. But it wasn't. Because I could hear Dad snoring from downstairs. I didn't find out the truth from my parents. I found it from a girl named Claire. She lived across the canal, in a pale blue house with wind chimes on the porch and a swing that was always crooked. She was a year older than me, 11, maybe 12, and had the cautious, narrowed eyes of someone who knew more than she was supposed to. We didn't talk much, just nods across the water, sometimes a wave when the boats weren't moving. But one day after school, I was sitting on the dock, throwing pebbles, and she walked over, not quite to the edge, just close enough to be heard. She didn't smile. "My mom says, I'm not allowed to come to your house," she said. I blinked. "Why?" She scratched her elbow, not looking at me. "She says it's where the dead people sleep." I laughed, but it didn't feel real. "What dead people?" Claire finally looked up. Her voice was almost a whisper. "You don't know?" I shook my head. She stared at me for a long moment, then turned around and walked home. She never waved again after that. That night I asked Dad. We were alone in the kitchen. He was opening a beer, watching the news with the sound off. Hey, Dad, do you know anything about the people who used to live here? His hand paused midair. What kind of thing? He asked, not looking at me. Like, did something bad happen? He sipped his beer and smiled too wide. Bad? It's Long Island, buddy. People move all the time. Sometimes they can't keep up with the mortgage. Sometimes marriages go south. That's all. I nodded, but the way his jaw tensed gave it away. He knew something. They both did. I went to the school library the next day. There were 2 computers in the corner, slow as syrup and yellowed from age. I typed in our address, 112 Ocean Avenue, Amityville. The first 10 results were all about a book, then about a movie, then the murders, 6 people, 1 night. I clicked through article after article, each one worse than the last. The DeVio family, shot in their beds, parents, 2 girls, 2 boys. I stared at the screen until the bell rang. Then I printed 1 page and folded it into my pocket. That night, I read the entire article under my blanket with a flashlight. I read about Ronald DeFeo Jr., the oldest son. About how he said he'd heard voices. About how no one heard the gunshots. About how the victims were all found face down in their beds. No signs of struggle. No signs they ever woke up. I looked at the floor plan of the house. It was identical to ours. Same stairs, same attic window, same hallway curve outside my room. And the boy, the younger son, John, had slept in the very room I slept in now. The same spot, the same air, the same view of the canal. I sat up in bed and stared at the round window. There were 6 handprints on the inside of the glass. I didn't sleep that night, or the night after. The more I read, the less sense it made. People said the murders didn't add up. The gun should have woken the whole house. There were no signs of sedation, no evidence of break-in, no motive beyond vague family tension. And yet, all 6 victims lay face down, neatly, quietly, as if they'd simply gone to sleep. I brought it up to Mom days later, quietly, carefully. I showed her the folded article. She didn't even read it, just looked at the headline, and her face went pale. I thought we agreed, she said. No more questions. I tried again. But why this house? Why didn't you tell me? We don't talk about the past here, she cut in. We're not them. But, her voice cracked. If you bring that into this house, it'll come back. She left the room. I found the article later, torn into pieces and flushed halfway down the toilet. That evening, I checked the crawl space again. I don't know what I was expecting. Proof maybe. Something tangible. But everything was as I left it. Doll in the corner, claw marks on the wood, the faint, sour smell of something old and forgotten. Except, there were more marks now. Not on the beams, on the ceiling. 6 tally marks, fresh, scratched deep into the sloped wood directly above where I'd first seen the rocking horse. I didn't count them at first, but when I did, I whispered the number without meaning to. 6. And I swear something whispered it back. That night I dreamed of gunfire. Not loud, not shocking, just distant. Like fireworks heard through glass. I saw beds and bodies and a boy. He looked like me. But when he turned around, he had no eyes. Only a mouth, open, screaming. But no sound came out. When I woke, it was 3:15, and the stain on my ceiling had split clean down the middle, like something was pressing through. Something that wanted out. The dream was sharper than any I'd had before. Clearer. It didn't feel like a dream at all. I was back in the crawl space behind the wardrobe, but at one night, Everything was bathed in pale blue light, like the kind that comes just before dawn, when the world holds its breath. I crawled through the opening, and I saw myself, sitting cross-legged in the corner. Not a mirror, not a reflection. Another me. Same pajamas, same scar on the knee, same hair flattened from sleep. He was staring straight at me with eyes that didn't blink. I tried to speak. He smiled, but the smile was wrong. Too wide, too knowing. Like he'd been waiting. Then he tilted his head and pointed behind him, into the darkest part of the crawl space. And that's when I saw it. A mirror. I don't know how I missed it before. It sat leaning against the far wall, half covered in dust, framed in carved wood that shimmered faintly in the dim light. The glass was mottled, warped by age, but it pulled at me. I stepped forward. The closer I got, the louder something began to buzz in my ears. Not a sound, more like pressure, like static inside my head. I looked into the mirror, and what I saw wasn't me. Not exactly. The boy in the mirror looked like me, but his face didn't move the way mine did. His head turned slower, like water moving through syrup. His eyes darted a second too late. When I raised my hand, his followed. But there was a pause, like a bad video connection. His movements lagged behind mine, just slightly, but enough to know it wasn't me. And his mouth was smiling. I woke in my bed, heart hammering, cold sweat clinging to my neck. But my feet were dirty, dusty, like I'd been crawling on bare wood. I checked behind the wardrobe before school. The crawl space was the same, dark, narrow, quiet. The doll, the tally marks. And now, the mirror. It was real. I hadn't noticed it before. Maybe I hadn't wanted to. But there it was, exactly as in the dream, leaning against the back wall, frame chipped but ornate, glass fogged with time. I stepped closer and stared into it. The boy stared back. At first everything seemed fine, but then the lag began. When I blinked, he didn't. When I turned my head, his followed. Too slow, too smooth. And then he smiled. Wide, unnatural, tooth heavy. I didn't. That night I told Mom there was a mirror in the crawl space. She stopped mid-stir in the pot of soup. A mirror, she said, not curious, not surprised, just flat. I saw it in a dream, I said, and then it was there. She didn't speak for a moment, then she said, some things are there long before we see them. From then on, the mirror watched me, not just in the crawl space, in my mind, in dreams, in the reflections that shouldn't have included it. Sometimes I'd glance at my bedroom window at night and see the glint of glass from the gable's angle. An impossible view. But there it was, the shape of a frame that shouldn't reflect anything from that distance. Other times, I'd see the mirror in places it couldn't be. In the doorknob, the toaster, the water, always showing just a little more than it should. And every time, my reflection would smile, even when I didn't. At school, I started catching glimpses of myself turning corners when I knew I hadn't moved. One afternoon, as I stepped into the bathroom, I saw myself already standing at the sink in the mirror. The other me looked up slowly, smiled. I turned and ran. Back home, I checked the crawl space again. This time, the mirror's glass was clean. Too clean, like someone had wiped it from the inside. There were fingerprints, small, my size, but pressed against the inside of the glass, as if someone had been trying to get out. And carved along the wooden frame were 3 words, etched with something sharp. Stay in here. The letters were uneven, childish, but angry. I backed out and didn't return. But the mirror didn't need me to come to it anymore. It started appearing in my dreams like a door, always standing open, always flickering with something just beyond reach. I tried telling Dad. He said I was spending too much time alone, that boys my age needed sports, not stories. But his eyes didn't meet mine when he said it. That night, he locked the garage again. Then something changed. The mirror started speaking, not in words, in moments, in flickers of motion I hadn't made, in expressions I didn't recognize. I glance into the bathroom mirror and see myself already looking, already watching. I'd blink and the reflection would hold, wouldn't follow, would wait, and then grin. One night, I stood at the bathroom sink, brushing my teeth, when I saw it clearly. The other me, reflected in the mirror, raised a hand, but I hadn't. It touched the glass, palm flat, and then mouthed something. No sound, no breath, just movement. I leaned closer, watched my own face, whisper the words I couldn't hear. But I understood. I heard them anyway. Inside my head, "You're almost ready." I couldn't keep it in anymore. The mirror, the reflections, the way it watched me even when I wasn't looking, the things I heard, the way the house seemed to breathe around it. It had gone too far. So I told her. We were in the laundry room, just the two of us. The washing machine hummed. My voice shook, but I told her everything. The dreams, the smile, the mirror, the writing on the frame. And when I said the last part, about what it whispered to me, "You're almost ready," she stopped folding the sheets. Very slowly she looked up at me. Her eyes were still, not angry, not confused, just cold. "Don't," she said. Her voice was low, measured, like she'd practiced it. "Don't ever talk about that again. Not in this house." I blinked. "But Mom..." "Not ever." Her voice broke. She gripped the edge of the basket like it was the only thing holding her upright. "You don't understand what you're inviting." I stood there frozen. She turned back to the dryer and didn't say another word. That night I went into the crawl space again. I don't know why. Maybe I needed to prove it to myself, that it was still there, that it hadn't just been something in my head. But when I crouched down and pushed open the panel, something felt wrong. The air was still, too still. Even the dust seemed to hang motionless. I crawled in. The mirror was there, but different. The glass was cracked, not shattered. Just one clean line down the middle, like a hairline fracture splitting something alive. And worse, it didn't follow me anymore. I raised my hand. My reflection didn't move. I tilted my head, smiled, blinked. Nothing. The boy in the mirror just stood there, mouth slightly open, eyes fixed on mine, unmoving, like a wax figure that used to breathe. I reached out. My fingers hovered just above the glass. The surface buzzed, like static under skin. And then the glass darkened, turned smoky, cloudy, swallowing my reflection whole. And something else came into view. A face, not mine, older, shadowed, watching me from behind the mirror, its features flickering in and out of the haze. I backed out of the crawl space, heart pounding, breath jagged. I didn't sleep that night. I must have drifted off sometime near dawn, because when the sound came, it pulled me violently awake. Bang, not a creak, not footsteps, not whispers. A gunshot, then another, and another. 6 in total. Each one louder than the last, each one ringing through the bones of the house like they'd never stopped. I jumped out of bed, heart in my throat, and flung open the door. The hallway was dark, still, silent. But something moved below. I crept downstairs. The stairs groaned beneath me. Not loudly, but enough to feel like I wasn't the only one hearing them. And then I saw it. On the middle landing, where the light from the hallway just barely reached, there were prints, not footprints, smears. Streaks of dark, wet mud dragged across the steps. And in the middle of it all, a single bare footprint, heel to toe, facing upward. Like someone had walked up from the basement, slowly, one step at a time. I ran back to bed and locked the door. I didn't tell anyone the next day. Dad was already gone when I woke up. Mom was in the kitchen, stirring coffee that had gone cold. Anna was humming the same 3 notes over and over, the same 3 from the mirror's whisper. I watched her from the doorway. She stopped and looked at me, smiled, and her eyes drifted, just for a second, toward the stairs. The dreams got longer, heavier. They didn't feel like dreams anymore. They felt like replays, like I was stepping into something that had already happened. Only this time, I was the one holding the camera, or the gun. The first time, I woke up sweating. Hands clenched so tight, my fingernails had left crescent moons in my palms. I could still feel the weight of it. Cold metal, warm grip, a rifle in my hands and my feet, moving quietly, purposefully, down a dark hallway that looked exactly like ours. I wasn't watching myself in these dreams. I was being someone else, but I couldn't control it. Each time, the sequence was the same. A step, a door, a bed, a face, and then the slow raise of the gun, the tremble in the finger that wasn't mine, the deafening silence before the shot, then blackout, every time. 6 rooms, 6 shots, then nothing. When I woke, I'd be back in my own bed, but something always felt off. My fingers would twitch long after waking. My shoulder ached like I'd been bracing for recoil. And worse, my mind was split. Half of me knew who I was. A boy, scared, confused, living in a house too big for his family. But the other half remembered different things. Smells I'd never known. Cigar smoke and cheap whiskey. Memories that didn't belong. Nights alone in a basement, screaming into pillows. Guilt that wasn't mine. And a voice inside my head, low and strained. They were better off quiet. It wasn't just in dreams anymore. During the day, the flashes would come. Little blinks of wrongness. I'd be brushing my teeth, and for a split second, the mirror would show a different bathroom. One with olive green tile and an old medicine cabinet. I'd look at my hands and see hair on the knuckles, a tattoo on the wrist that faded as I stared. Once, I opened a drawer looking for socks and found bullets, then blinked, and it was just socks again. I tried writing things down, names, dates, times, but the words would rearrange on the page, smearing like ink soaked in oil. I'd see a name in my notebook, John Matthew DeFeo. I never wrote that name, but my hand had. I stopped sleeping eventually, but it didn't help. The house didn't care whether I was awake or not. I'd be lying in bed, fully alert, and the room would shimmer. The ceiling would breathe. The wallpaper would flicker like film strip frames, and I'd be back there again, walking that hallway, carrying that gun, hearing a voice behind me that sounded like my own, but older, deader. Do it again. One evening, I tried to tell Mom. I broke. I told her everything. The dreams, the memories, the smell of cordite on my skin. The name I'd never learned but somehow knew. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just sat on the edge of the tub, folded her hands, and said, "Maybe the house doesn't want you to forget." And then she looked at me. Really looked. For the first time in weeks. "Do you remember the way he walked?" she asked. I didn't answer. She smiled, faint and far away. I do? That night I went to the mirror. Not the crawl space one. The one in my room. A simple thing, hung over my dresser. I hadn't trusted it for weeks, but I needed to know. I stood in front of it for a long time, breathing, waiting. At first it was just me, pale, tired, hollow-eyed. Then something shifted. The air thickened, the lights flickered, and there was movement behind me, in the reflection. Someone stepped into frame, slowly, silently, behind my shoulder. He was tall, thin, dressed in a red and white striped sweater, stretched and faded. His skin looked melted, like candle wax left in the sun. One eye was missing, the other was cloudy, unfocused. His jaw hung slightly crooked, as if unhinged, and his head, the left side of it was gone, as if something had blown it open from inside. He stared at me in the mirror, not angry, not sad, just waiting. I turned around. No one. I turned back. He was still there. Closer now, right behind me. I ran from the room, breath jagged, heart pounding so hard I couldn't hear anything else. I ran downstairs into the garage, into the cold where the air didn't move wrong. And I cried. For a long time. When I finally went back upstairs, the mirror was clean. Clear. Just me. But I knew something had stepped through. And it wasn't going back. She called me into her room just after midnight. Her voice was small. The kind you use when you're not sure if you're still allowed to speak. The light was off, but the hallway lamp bled through the crack in the door, painting her face in halves. One side still, the other shaking. She was sitting on the edge of the bed, clutching a folded sweater to her chest like a shield. I stood in the doorway. "Come here," she whispered. I did. I sat on the carpet, cross-legged, like I used to when she read to me. But this time, there was no book, no smile, just her, and a truth that had been waiting too long. "I should have told you," she said, long before any of this started. Her voice cracked. "I knew about this house. I always knew." I stayed quiet, let her speak. She rubbed her hands together like they were cold, even though the room was warm. "When I was little, I lived 2 blocks from here, over on Bayview, just a walk through the marsh road. This neighborhood wasn't fancy back then. No boats, just docks and weeds and silence." She took a breath. "I was 9 when it happened. The murders, I felt my stomach twist. I didn't see the bodies, of course, but I saw them bring him out. Ronald, the boy who did it." Her eyes glazed over, like she was back in that moment. "They pushed him into the car, and he didn't fight. He didn't cry. He just looked up, right at me, like he knew I was watching from behind the screen door." She shivered. After that, the house sat empty for a while. People whispered. Some said the devil lived there now. Others said it was just madness. But me? She looked at me, eyes dark. I started dreaming about it. Not every night. Just enough. Enough to feel it calling. She looked down at the sweater in her hands, pressed it tighter. "I kept dreaming of the round window. The one in your room. Always with light behind it. Always with someone staring out. I thought, maybe if I came back, if I faced it, it would stop." She laughed, bitter and small. It didn't. I couldn't speak. The air felt too thick, my tongue too heavy. I wanted to ask why. Why bring us here? Why trap us inside something she knew was wrong? But before I could, she answered the question I hadn't asked. Because it doesn't let go. She met my eyes again, and for the first time in my life, I saw real fear in my mother's face. I thought maybe, if I lived in it, if I gave it what it wanted, If I let it watch, maybe it would finally leave me alone. She reached out and touched my hand. Her fingers were trembling. But I was wrong. It doesn't want peace. It doesn't forget. And then, almost a whisper, it never forgives anyone who's looked at it too long. We sat in silence. Not even the house made a sound. Finally, I found my voice. What does it want now? She looked down, at the floor, at the dark stain creeping out from beneath the closet door, then back at me. We didn't pack properly. There wasn't time. The last week in that house was all shouting and silence. My parents fought constantly, mostly about things they didn't say out loud. My father's hours at work had vanished. His desk phone rang, but no one was ever on the other end. He spent most days in the garage, staring at the walls like he expected them to speak. My mother stopped cooking, stopped cleaning, spent her afternoons lying on the couch, staring at the ceiling stain that no longer bothered to hide. At night, I'd hear her rattling the pill bottles with shaking hands, whispering numbers to herself like they were prayers. And Anna just drew, not pictures of the kitchen anymore. Now she drew the attic, the round window, and someone inside it. The final night, something broke. A scream. I don't remember whose. A slammed door. My father shouting words I didn't recognize. My mother sobbing on the stairs, and me, in my room, staring at the mirror, waiting to see which version of myself would appear. In the end, we left at 3 a.m. No one said goodbye to the house, but the house didn't need us to. We moved 3 states away, into a small apartment above a dry cleaner. 2 bedrooms, no mirrors except the one above the sink. My father never got another job. He stopped speaking after a while. Mom tried for a while to hold it together, bought new clothes, changed her hair, but she never really came back. 3 years later, she died. In her sleep, they said, though I always wondered if it was something else. If something from the house had finally caught up. If she'd just stopped running. I grew up, got older, moved again. City life, roommates, then alone. Tried not to think about it, tried to forget, but it didn't forget me. Even now, I wake up at 3:15, not every night, but enough. Enough to remember how it felt to wake in that attic room with the stain overhead and the round window watching me. My body always knows before my mind does. Heart racing, skin damp, air too still. And sometimes, when I go to the bathroom, I catch my reflection before I'm ready. Sometimes, it doesn't move with me. It just stares and smiles. Once, I came home late and passed the hallway mirror. I wasn't looking at it. I wasn't even thinking about it. But in the corner of my eye, I saw my reflection, facing away, its back to the glass, even though I was looking straight at it. Another time, I was cooking, pan sizzling, news playing softly in the background. I called out, just instinctively, "Mom?" I don't know why. Maybe because the air shifted. Maybe because I felt watched. And from the bedroom down the hall, I heard her voice. Software close. "I'm here." I didn't check. I just turned off the stove and sat in the dark. People say trauma sticks in the body, that certain places, certain events can etch themselves into your cells like ink on paper. But I think it's more than that. Some houses don't need wood and brick to survive. They don't need to be on a street or a map. They just need a crack, a doorway, a memory, someone to carry them. I don't live at 112 Ocean Avenue anymore. No one does. They say the house has been renovated, the windows changed, the roof repaired, but it doesn't matter. Because the real house lives here, inside me, where I can't tear it down, where it keeps its rooms quiet and waits for someone else to look too long, to stare into the wrong mirror, to see the smile that isn't theirs, and wonder, what if it's still in there? What if it never left? The house is still with me, not the building. The house. Some homes don't need wood and brick to survive. They just need someone who remembers.